Okay, welcome to the first weekly video for legal research. These weekly videos will walk you through some of the materials, talk about some of the themes that are coming up and some of the things that we're going to be doing in the workshop this week. And in this week we're looking at legal research as evidence-based problem solving. What is legal research? What's it all about? And the reading looks at the distinction, which I think might be an increasingly meaningless distinction between doctrinal legal research and interdisciplinary research. And this comes from a time when law was really just a training school for people who'd work in the very sort of narrow confines of the legal profession. It was differently before my time. And when it was sort of safe to be able to say, as a lawyer, all you really need to do is look up some cases and look up some legislation, because that's not been the case for a very long time now. And one of the things we do in this unit is to build both sets of skills, to look at the skills in dealing with those traditional legal resources. And so far, you've been doing a little bit of research as part of your qualification, but you haven't been doing a lot of the research in terms of finding initial materials for yourself. So in your first year, you'll find there's a lot of material provided for you, and even like links directly to the material. But of course that doesn't happen in the real world. When you need to find something out, there's no textbook that will necessarily help you. There's no one giving you all the materials. So so the legal research capability as a graduate is that important ability to be able to find out information for yourself and evaluate it. And yes, you know, we're all very used to Google these days, but we need to understand how knowledge is created, distributed and evaluated. And we don't just Google for the answer, because there are lots of problems with doing that. You know, a very simple contract problem, you might be able to Google the answer and it's like, oh yes, 10,000 law students have Googled this question, which is, you know, the authority to use in case of frustration of contract or whatever. Yes, that's going to be a very commonly known piece of information, but in the professional world, where you need to know things that are much more obscure and much more difficult to access, Google is not going to do it for you. All right, so when we talk about legal research as problem solving, it's very important to know that it's about identifying what the issue is, what your problem is, and what the information you need to solve it actually is. It's very unlikely that X will mark the spot and you will find the answer to any research question. Usually research questions are big and imponderable, and all we can do is try and find a better answer than what we've had before. So for example, a couple of years ago we did the Tasmanian review into recidivist drink driving for the core issue that we looked at in legal research, and that's a very interesting area in that it's so insoluble. For most people, the penalties for drink driving are reasonably good deterrents. Most of us don't do it, or we're very careful if we do it, because we don't want to get caught, we don't want to lose our license, we don't want to be fined. But for the people who do run afoul of the drink driving laws, a significant number of them do it again and again and again. And obviously the deterrent effect of the law is not working. So that review was really concerned with, well, what can we do? What are some of the alternative options we can do if just fining people, even putting them in jail, is not improving the situation? And again, doctrinal legal research would say, well, what does the history of the common law judges have to say? And strangely enough, the 17th century judges had very little to say about drink driving. You know, the mid-20th century judges, very little to say about drink driving. So the doctrinal methods of research don't help us with a lot of these issues. We have to look outside. We have to look at what other jurisdictions are doing. We have to look at different innovations and options that come up. All right, so we know, and you're probably sick of hearing us say that, you know, the legal profession is changing. It is changing, and your needs of research skills will be changing along the way. But research is also changing. When I did my degree, it was all about books. During that process, it moved towards databases, you know, CD-ROMs, which were fixed databases that were burnt onto solid media. That, you know, you'd update them every few months, but, you know, there was no internet. Then the internet came in and we had these interactive databases. And today we're moving towards AI and AI's ability to research legal issues, which is looking very promising. But of course, someone has to be able to program the AI to actually do that and to understand what those needs are. So the actual field of research is changing quite dramatically. And what we can hope to do is get you up to speed so that you can stay up to date throughout your professional career and don't end up being one of these people who, has to get the secretary to look up the internet for them because they can't use Google. All right. And I think one of the core themes in this subject is that importance of understanding the process. And I know quite often students will say to me, why do I have to understand? I can just Google it and find out. And as I said before, some things are not Googleable, significant things are not Googleable. But the other thing is, muddling through is one of the key problems that have been identified with stress and lack of mental well-being in the legal profession. That people, there's a concept that we'll talk about later in the term that's imposter syndrome, where people feel as though that they don't have the skills they need to do the job. They manage to muddle their way through their qualifications and just scrape by, but they really know that they don't have what to get through, and then they think everyone else knows it, and it's a significant source of stress. So it's actually easier just to learn how to do these things properly than it is to just sort of say, I can cut corners here and not learn how to do it, and then maybe later when I'm working and I've got a quiet moment, then I'll find the time to figure out how to use a legal encyclopedia or how to distinguish a case or all these other things. It's much better to know how to do it now and have that confidence that will mean that you're feeling more stable and more able to cope with things in the work situation. And that those skills and the well-being aspect are an important part of this unit. And you'll see week after week we do talk about parts of that. But I'd just like to emphasise that part of it now. So yes, legal encyclopedias, we'll come back to that. That's a notorious one that people manage to get through law school without learning how to use. And part of the reason is they are really hard and counterintuitive to use. But we will learn how to use them, and when you do, you'll find that you will have access to a tool that is really invaluable to being a legal professional. All right, so this unit is broken down into 3 phases, and the unit really models the lifetime of a research project. So everything that we do in the workshops works you through the stages of completing a research project and works you through the different elements of it. So the idea is to give you that big picture broken up over 12 weeks. Now, in reality, you're not very often going to have 12 weeks to work on a project. You might have 4 weeks, you might have 3 days, you might have a year. The time is going to be different, but the different stages, the different aspects of those projects will be the same. So there are 3 main phases in this subject. The first is the establishment phase, where we look at all the things that you do at the start of a project, setting up the project, defining the project, setting the parameters, all the planning, getting ethics clearance, all those sorts of things. In the second phase, we move on to looking at focus on each of the individual sources, the different sources you'll use. So there's a week on rules, a week on precedents, a week on theories, a week on data. So we move through each of those and look at, well, how do you find them? What do you do when you have competing sources? How do you evaluate them? How do you weigh them up against each other? And the third phase that we do in this subject is the final phase of assembling a project, putting it together, presenting your ideas, presenting your data, and engaging in the process of feedback that you go through in the realistic situation in getting a project up and out to completion. Now, this is something which we don't prepare you all that well for at university. Often when we give you feedback, it is after you've done an assignment and it's finished, and it's like, well, if you ever do this assignment again, which hopefully you won't have to because you passed it, you might want to do these things instead. So here we try and focus more on the pre-form of feedback, and that's why the assessment's designed in the way it has been done, so that you try and get feedback while it's meaningful, before something is finalised. So it's something that's quite hard to do at university, and we don't often have the opportunity to do it, but in a research subject we have that. And we also have time to talk about some of those skills in giving and receiving feedback. And it's very important not only to know how to give others feedback, but also how to take feedback and to be able to deal with in a professional way some of those issues, and to be able to not get, our nose out of joint because someone's told us how to do something in a different way, and to actually, be resilient and go, well, that's a great idea, maybe I don't agree with it, but to actually learn from that. So we'll look at a little bit of that stuff in class as well. So this week, it's just mainly it's an introduction to the unit, to the subject, and the things we'll cover. There's a bit of a skip through some of the ideas that you will have encountered so far, ideas like relevance and stakeholder analysis and things that shape what we do as legal researchers and legal practitioners, but we want to touch on those again briefly, just to get you to, so make sure we're all on the same page. Side thing I want to mention briefly here is the idea of portfolios. The concept is used in two different ways in this unit. First, there's the research portfolio that you work on week to week, and you do a small, and I talk about this in the other video. You do a small stage of your research each week, you do a write-up of what you've done, and then you assemble it all into a portfolio at the end. So that's a research portfolio. But we also, in this unit, are keen to talk about your professional portfolio, which is where you keep all your evidence of your achievements, all your best work that you've done, all your work experience, your volunteering, and all those sorts of things. And that's a broader issue, and that's something that we want to talk about from time to time in terms of, are you keeping that evidence? Are you curating it well? Are you presenting it in a way that employers will be interested in? Because this is the crucial thing in terms of employability. Yes, getting good grades is good, but you'll find there'll be another 500 people with the same grades that you have. And to distinguish yourself, what firms look for are, what are your extracurriculars? What mooting competitions have you been in? Have you been in interviewing competitions? Have you been volunteering? All those sorts of things are very important. So we will return throughout the term and discuss this. And this is an open question. If you need help with this, I'm one of the people you can talk to. Maybe book an appointment time to have a chat, or raise the question if it's relevant in class, or discuss it in MS Teams, or one of those forums, to start thinking now, you're halfway through your degree, what does your portfolio look like? If you open it up and there's nothing in it, that is going to be a problem in about a year and a half's time when you come to graduate. So don't want to be the bearer of bad news here, but if you're one of the people who's saying, look, as long as I pass everything, someone will give me a really good job at the end, not going to happen. So yes, you've done a good job getting through your first year, getting yourself established, but now it's time to start taking those things further. So I just wanted to mention, because we talk about portfolios in two different ways, I just wanted to mention that briefly, that when I talk about portfolios as a research portfolio, it's just that compilation of that weekly work that you do, that you hand in at the end, and it's quite a different thing to your professional portfolio where you keep all those goodies and all those important stuff. All right, so the workshop for this week, it's a very easy introductory workshop. We're not going to rush into everything too quickly, but we're going to be looking at the core questions that come out of the committals issues paper. And what we want to start looking at are the different points of view that exist in different individuals, organisations, professions around that particular issue. And the really obvious one in terms of committals is that there's a very, very different perspective from the court administrators who are trying to administer a system of justice in an efficient way, and the individual accused person who is being committed. And let's also look at the witnesses in the case. We've got three radically different perspectives on this process, and the question of, do we need to change it, and if we change it, how do we change it? So one of the important parts of any research process is to start identifying what those different perspectives are, and to start thinking about, well, who's actually got a stake in this? I mean, there'll be people who say, I have a very strong opinion about committals, who have a strong opinion because they have strong opinions. And that's fine. But we are also interested in the people who have a real stake in that. And particularly from an administrative point of view, we have an increasing backlog in the justice system, increasingly long delays getting people to trial. Are there ways of making that more efficient? Our system of committals was designed not only in the pre-internet age, but in sort of the pre-electricity age. It was designed a long time ago, and we've put little piecemeal sort of reforms and different mechanisms in place, and we do things a little better, and we've introduced some new technologies. But what can we do to improve the whole process? So it's this topic we're going to be looking at throughout the term, but our starting point, the initial stage, is to start identifying who those people are, who people and organisations that have an interest in that debate, and how does that shape their opinions and their perspectives. Sorry, if you can hear that, new puppy. All right, I'm coming to the end of this. So we're going to briefly touch on all these issues in the workshop, but in terms of preparation, start having a look at the issues paper on committals. Familiarise yourself with it. If you've never seen a committal, make some time to see one, because it's really, really interesting, the difference between learning abstractly about, criminal law and what happens, and actually sitting in a magistrate's court and watching what happens. And this week we'll work on that first stage. We'll look at developing a mind map, and that will start our first step along the journey.